this is a big issue, right? The issue of what we do to animals, the issue of how we exist alongside animals, how we interact with them, how we, I suppose, navigate the complexities of our existence alongside their existence, alongside the natural world that we are a part of yet separate from. It's funny, often I don't necessarily know how I'm going to start talks, but yesterday something happened which sadly gave me a way into this conversation. So yesterday I was at the Botanical Garden here in Porto. Beautiful place, it's lovely, right? And there's peacocks in the Botanical Garden. Lovely peacocks. They have these huge feathers, don't they, that they display as part of their sort of courting and mating rituals. And so there's this male peacock who is around a female peacock, and he gets his big feathers out and he's putting on a show for the female peacock. But obviously, he starts drawing attention from people who he probably didn't want to draw attention from, people he's less interested in. And all of a sudden there was this group of people all around this peacock, sort of mere feet or inches even away from this peacock, with their phones out filming. And I was watching this from a distance thinking, we're so entitled to animals, aren't we? We feel that they owe us whatever we want. And even in a situation where people say, oh, I'm just admiring them, I'm just admiring their beauty, I just want to share their beauty online, that's not admiration, it's objectification. It's using these animals as a prop for our own aesthetic desires, for our own social media. And I was just so baffled watching all these people just completely up in the space of this peacock, completely disrupting what they wanted to do, which was court this female peacock, who obviously lost interest when lots of people showed up. And I thought, how disruptive, how self-entitled. And I think the idea of being self-entitled to the bodies of animals is quite apt. Because when we think about what we do to animals, we view them and their bodies as being objects or property for us to use as we want to. And this doesn't just even apply to the animals who we farm and eat, even though that's obviously the most sort of clear example of what I'm talking about. But it's just all animals. We put them in zoos to leer at them or force them into tanks to make dolphins and whales jump up and down and splash around so that we can gawp at them and claim that we're doing this because it's some sort of admiration or care or, I don't know, something positive. But it's not. The thing is, we view animals and the world around us as being something that is there for us to use as we please. We kind of arbitrarily decide which species should fulfill which purpose, but their purpose, whatever we decide, is one that we decide. And so maybe they're an ornament, maybe they are food or clothing or an animal that we can test on or lock in a cage in a zoo or wherever it may be. But make no mistake, we view animals in the world as they're existing for us, just in different ways and different forms. And I think that's troubling. I think that this idea that we deny them autonomy, deny them the right to their own body, deny them just the right to exist. I think the fact that we deny that to them speaks to this very deep-rooted problem that we have in our relationship with them. Sometimes people think, well, you're a vegan, you don't want to eat meat, dairy, and eggs. And that's true. But the purpose of veganism isn't just to avoid meat, dairy, and eggs. It's to challenge something greater than that. Because meat, dairy, and eggs, and the clothing that we wear, and the things that we do, they're all symptoms of a problem. Meat, dairy, and eggs may be the most severe, the most violent, the most pernicious and prevalent form of this problem, but it's still a symptom of the problem nonetheless. And the problem is the mindset that we have. This idea of entitlement over the body of others, or the bodies of others. And because we have this idea, this sense of entitlement, this belief that we are so far above animals that we can do as we please to them, all the things that we do to animals for meat, dairy, and eggs becomes permissible because with our mindset, we've decided that the purpose of these animals is to be subjugated, farmed, and slaughtered for us to consume. But I think that's terribly worrying. Because for what reason do we believe that our species has some divine right, or some preordained right to do as we please to someone else, just because they don't look like us, or maybe aren't as intelligent as us, or maybe can't do some of the things that we can do? I think one of the biggest problems that we as a species face is our arrogance in this regard. We often say things like, we're top of the food chain, or can an animal do the things that we can do? And I think we're completely missing the point here. Because often the reasons that we use to harm and subjugate animals, our intellectual superiority, our ability to physically dominate, we use those as justifications, but actually they're the opposite. They're the reasons why we should be held accountable in this regard. Because it is precisely because of our power and because of our intellect that we have a moral obligation to challenge how we view animals and ultimately how we treat them. With that power comes responsibility, as Uncle Ben says in Spider-Man. But it's a good quote, because with great power does come great responsibility. But the problem is, currently, we as a species have decided that our power gives us the right to tyrannize, to subjugate, to objectify. We are, in essence, dictators of this planet who, at a whim, decide who lives and who dies. We cast the finger arbitrarily and decide that because this animal over here is pink and oinks, they deserve to be killed in a gas chamber. Why? What gave us the right to decide that so arbitrarily? We look at other humans who have power, and we look at those humans who wield that power in a forceful way. We look at those people as being bad, immoral. An extreme example may be a dictator, but even if we look at other situations of human suffering or human injustice, a misogynist views a woman's body as their right, views a woman's life as below theirs, and so therefore they feel entitled to do as they please. They believe that because they can physically impose themselves, that grants them some kind of moral right. But of course, that's a gross miscarriage of justice, a gross miscarriage of one's ability and obligation to act responsibly with the power and authority that we have. And I think that the way we view our relationship with animals should be something similar. Now, that's not to say that we have to view non-human animals as being comparable to us in ways that they clearly aren't. It's absolutely fine to acknowledge that there are degrees of sentience, degrees of ability, degrees of capability. But even if that may be true, in a situation where we can reduce the harm, suffering, violence, and death that we cause to others, how on earth can we morally justify not doing so? How can we possibly rationalize living in a way that increases violence, that increases suffering, that increases fear and pain and terror and death? If we have a choice in front of us every single day to reduce all of these things, why wouldn't we? And if we wouldn't, can we look at ourselves in the mirror and still claim that we are virtuous and compassionate and driven by a sense of ethics and values? Can we do that whilst animals are in gas chambers screaming to death? I would believe not. Now look, we live in a society where these things are legalized, normalized, perpetuated. Our responsibility as consumers maybe isn't as obvious as that, isn't quite as simple in many ways, because we have been misled into believing certain lies. Obviously those lies are animal farming is sustainable, but most nefariously and importantly to this conversation, that animal farming is ethical. I have a lot to say that is negative towards what we do to animals, but I also have a lot of understanding and empathy for those within society who still perpetuate these industries, because it is something that is so normalized everywhere. It is culturally normalized, it is legally normalized, it is perpetuated by our loved ones, our friends, our family members, our peers. It brings me no great shock to then live in a world where many people don't necessarily agree with the things that I have to say. But But I think that statement is actually interesting as well, because I actually do think that a lot of people agree with the things that I have to say. I don't think that veganism is some radical, extreme view. I actually think that the messaging principles behind veganism are ones that we all broadly already agree with. Because we do think that animal cruelty is wrong. And we do think that animal suffering is wrong. So we already acknowledge the basic principles that underpin the philosophy of veganism, which is that the reduction of exploitation, suffering, and harm to non-human animals is preferable. That's something that we already do agree with. It's just we have this sort of state of contradiction where we believe these things, but then the actions that we partake in contradict them. So, for example, we think of someone who harms a dog as being just morally abject, just so cruel. A recent example comes to mind. In the US, there is a governor of South Dakota. Her name is Kristi Noem. Now, a few weeks ago, Kristi Noem had aspirations of becoming Trump's vice president in the upcoming election. So she published a memoir. Big mistake. In this memoir, she detailed how she made a tough decision. And the idea behind this tough decision was that it would show to the American people, and most importantly to Trump, that she could make tough choices. You know, you could rely on Kristi Noem to be there when the going got difficult, and she would be the one to get down and dirty and do what needed to be done. So, the way that she showed this is she discussed her dog. A dog she called Cricket. Now, she got Cricket the dog originally because she wanted Cricket the dog to be a hunting dog because she hunts pheasants. That's a red flag, isn't it? So she had this dog, Cricket, and she wanted this puppy to be trained to hunt pheasants. However, Cricket was mischievous and cheeky. She was a puppy. And as a consequence, she wasn't very good at doing what Kristi Noem had decided she needed to do to deserve life. And so Kristi took Cricket to a gravel pit and shot her, killed her. At the same time, she also had a goat. Now, this goat was also a bit mischievous and also smelly, she said. So she brought the goat also to a gravel pit and she shot the goat. But the goat didn't die. The goat had actually jumped up to try and defend himself. And so as a consequence, the first bullet didn't kill the goat. So then she had to go and get another bullet, load up the gun, and then shoot and kill the goat with the second round. After all that time, the goat had been suffering. Now, this drew international condemnation. People were furious. And they weren't just furious, you know, in the politically opposite sides. They were furious everywhere. Fox News hosts, you know, the ever-reliable beacon of morality, right? Even they were condemning this lady's actions because we all agreed it was terrible. Who would take a dog and shoot them and kill them just because they weren't good for hunting? A horrible person, right? But I would argue the death of Cricket is far more humane than the death of the animals who we consume in slaughterhouses. Hold that thought for just a moment, because before I get to that point, in fact, Kristi's killing of the dog was so bad in people's eyes, she's pretty much ruined any chance of becoming vice president. She's basically said that it's just not going to happen because of this incident of killing the dog. Now, I am greatly reassured by that, don't get me wrong. I would be deeply, deeply worried and traumatized if she released this memoir and people were like, oh, she killed a dog. Yeah, she killed tough decisions. That would be far more disturbing from a societal viewpoint perspective, but I can't help but feel so frustrated. So immensely frustrated. Firstly, the killing of the goat was worse because of the suffering the goat endured, but people cared less about the goat because the goat's a goat, the dog was a dog. But secondly, what right do we have as a society, as a culture, as a world, to point the finger at someone for killing an animal when we do it every day? It happens all the time. We're not against killing animals. How can we be? We kill 85 billion land animals a year. Marine animals, as many as 2.3 trillion fish are pulled from our oceans every single year. We're not against killing animals. Quite the opposite. If you were to view what we did objectively, you'd think that we relished in the killing of animals, that we found it fun, enjoyable, pleasant. And actually, pleasure is the primary reason why many of us do, because we like how they taste. So actually, from an objective viewpoint, we do kill animals for pleasure. Maybe not the pleasure of killing, but the consequence of what we get as a result of killing. I mean, just think about this. We force tens of billions of animals every single year through a system of farming that involves forced impregnations, mutilations like castrations and tail docking and teeth clipping. We take babies from their mothers. We exploit them by keeping them in concrete pens, even the ones who are raised outside. They all end up in a slaughterhouse, where in the EU, the UK, Australia, gas chambers are used for pigs and birds. I can't quite wrap my head around this. We do all of these things, and then we force animals into gas chambers or into kill floors where we cut their throats. And then the reason we do it, when someone asks us why, is we say, I just like the taste of steak. A transient moment of sensory pleasure, a meal. We eat a meal, it lasts, what, 15 minutes? 20 minutes if we're taking our time? And in that time frame, we find a form of sensory pleasure, taste pleasure. And that's the reason why everything that's happened has happened. For that moment, for those 15 minutes, someone has had to go through that system and be killed because for 15 minutes we want to go, yum. I don't know how we can call ourselves animal lovers and do that. I don't know how we can say that we're against animal cruelty and animal suffering and do that. Those two things don't add up. Those two things are the polar opposite. Those are not the actions of an animal lover. Those are the actions of someone who views animals with contempt, with a sense of entitlement to their bodies, with a sense of ownership over their lives. That's the opposite of love, of care, of compassion, of morality when it comes to how we should view non-human animals. And I said that I think that the killing of Cricket the dog was more humane than the killing of animals in slaughterhouses, because if I had a choice, I would rather be shot and killed than endure everything an animal does to end up in a gas chamber and to be suffocated unconscious with carbon dioxide. If I had that choice, I would rather be shot. And yet, the irony is that we call what happens in slaughterhouses humane. The industry tells us that the gassing of pigs is the humane way to kill these animals, but none of us would choose that way out if we had a choice. None of us would opt for that over a clean bullet. Of course we wouldn't. But that tells us all we need to know about what happens in slaughterhouses. If we condemn the actions of someone for doing something that is more humane than what happens in a slaughterhouse, then how should we feel about what happens in a slaughterhouse? And can we really use these words like humane and high welfare? Can we really apply these labels to something that really deep down we already know does not fulfill the criteria required to be labeled as humane? If we open up a thesaurus, the word humane, synonyms for that word, are things like benevolence and compassion and kindness. And yet, if we open up a thesaurus and find the word slaughter, synonyms include massacre, bloodshed. How can we have compassionate massacres, or kind bloodshed, or humane slaughter? These things are oxymorons. They don't add up. But they are things that we tell ourselves to make the act of doing something wrong seem okay. And like I said, it's not necessarily the fault of the consumer, because this is what we're told. This is the illusion that's fed to us. This is the lie that's sold to us every time we turn on the TV, or go outside, or go into a supermarket. What do we see? Adverts, marketing, propaganda, telling us something that reaffirms to us that what we're doing is okay. But actually, when we think about it, I would argue very vehemently, it's not okay. It's the opposite of okay, really, when we think about what we're doing. So we're told all these things about these industries, given imagery and photographs and so these myths around animal farming. Whilst at the same time we have this mindset where we've been taught by the cultures we live in to view animals as being objects, as property, as viewing their lives as not existing for them, but existing for us in some way, whichever way we decide we want them to exist for us. And then we use language to devalue them and demean them. I mean, we call the animals we farm livestock. Livestock. We reduce sentient, feeling, conscious beings to the term livestock. Stock, what you find on the supermarket shelf. Stock that just so happens to be alive, which is a real inconvenience, right? That's what we do. We view these animals not as individuals, conscious, feeling, sentient individuals, but we reduce them through the language we use to property, to objects, to items that are destined to be stock. That's their purpose. A pig, a cow, a chicken, a lamb, they are livestock. They exist for one reason, to become stock on the supermarket shelf. That's troubling. Because language is important, isn't it? We call animals an it. Again, we reaffirm to ourselves that they are not deserving of being viewed as sentient individuals. You know, we think, it doesn't matter because it's a pig, it's a chicken. Chickens are stupid, pigs are dirty. So again, we tell ourselves stories about these animals. Pigs are dirty. Pigs are not dirty. The reason that pigs roll around in mud is to cool themselves off because they can't sweat. They don't roll around in feces. That's a story that we tell ourselves. Chickens, they're not stupid. They're also pretty fierce. I have a sanctuary in the UK. The chickens are the most courageous of those animals, let me tell you, right? I've been chased by many a rooster. But it's interesting how the language we use to often demean our own species, or even the names of animal species. We often link together different forms of oppressive viewership or language together. So for example, words like cow or dog, we use to reaffirm misogynistic language. Men use those words to demean women through sexist ideas. But we use the names of animals, the species names of animals, to do so. So it's fascinating to me how those in positions of power and authority can tie together all these different forms of oppression and allow them to bounce off one another to reaffirm to themselves their position of dominance and power and authority and their mentality that they somehow deserve it. I found that to be another troubling element of this. Language, ownership, the way we view them, how we demean them, how we create stories around these animals to constantly bring them down in our view. And I think something that often happens with vegans is people get offended by vegans because they think that a vegan is trying to elevate an animal to something comparable to a human. And I often hear sort of questions or sort of hypothetical situations where people say, oh, do you think a chicken's life has the same value as a human's life? And that's a red herring. That's not what we're saying necessarily. What we're saying is that the lives of chickens and pigs and cows and marine animals in the oceans are enough to warrant just the most basic moral consideration from us. Just the most basic empathy. I think we can all think about what animals feel and think and their sentience. But there's also something interesting within this, which is things that animals can do that we can't. Again, I've often throughout this talk already spoken about the things that we do that animals can't. Our intellect, our cognition, our ability to discuss complex, big, important ideas, our ability to change, to create civilizations and societies. I mean, my goodness, I have a lot of bad things to say about people, but we're also amazing. And I have a lot of time for our species, and a lot of care and empathy for our species, because we are amazing. The things we can do are incredible. But I also think it's important to flip that on the head a little bit, and think about non-human animals, and the things that they can do that we can't. I mean, when we think about our senses, what I find fascinating is the idea that there are animals out there that have senses or abilities within those senses to do things that we can't. We know animals or certain species can see greater distances, hear wider frequency ranges, to smell more acutely. It's interesting how we can recognize that animals have often senses that we don't necessarily have in the ways that they do. But I like to think about this in a different way. What about the ability to feel? They can see, smell, hear. What about feel? When we think about animals in farms and slaughterhouses, our automatic reaction is to presume that they're not suffering in a way that we do, that our suffering must be greater. And I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that could be true, because suffering isn't just physical, it's emotional. And so with heightened senses of intellectual capability, one would imagine one's emotional suffering may be greater as well. But one of the things that we often say about non-human animals, which I think ties into this nicely, is that they can't do things that we can do, like plan for the future, or comprehend death. People sort of say, an animal doesn't understand death, so inflicting death upon them, I mean, they don't know what it is, so why does it matter? I think this is troubling for a couple of reasons, but let's say that's true. Let's say that pigs in farms, for example, they're not intelligent enough to think for the future or plan for the future, and they also can't comprehend death. They don't know what death is. Maybe that's true. I think they show signs of grief and mourning and loss, which are suggestive of an awareness of death and the totality of death. But let's say that they don't. Let's say that you're a pig now on a farm. So you've been born, and the first thing that happens to you is a farmer comes along and clips off your teeth, chops off your tail, and in the EU, if you're male, maybe castrates you as well. So now you've just been born, you've had these things happen to you, you've been injected with different things, and now you're taken away from your mother. And now you're put in a concrete pen. And then you're raised for 5 or 6 months in this concrete pen being fattened up. Now let's say that you can't comprehend death, and you can't plan for the future. I mean, being born in this environment means they have no idea of an environment outside of this. Of course, they don't know what it's like to be free, so they can't visualize necessarily what being free means. So now we think that all they know is this place, and then we're going to claim that they can't comprehend death. So now what we're saying is all they know is this place, and as far as they know, all they will ever know is this place. Because even in moments of pure suffering, where the worst things are being done to us, at least we have the mercy of knowing that it has to end in some way. It's a small mercy, but at least it exists. But for those animals, let's say they can't comprehend death. Let's say this is all they've ever known. We've essentially created a place that to them is eternally a place of suffering and fear and harm and subjugation. Now for us, we have a place like that too, and we call it hell. A place of eternal fear, subjugation, harm. A place where there is no end point. It exists forever. In essence, if we devalue animals' intelligence to that point, we essentially have to admit that we've created something that to them must resemble something similar to what we believe is being a version of hell. I think that's provocative. It is obviously an idea. But I think even when we do think about animals, the way that we devalue them may actually make what we do to them worse, not better. Think about us in a situation where we break our arm. It hurts, but what we know is that it will end. There'll be pain relief, an ambulance can come, but it will end, our arm will heal. We can know all of this, we can think about this, we can try to get absorbed in this future where our arm isn't like that. But for animals, they don't even have that sweet release. I found that to be another interesting thing for us to dwell upon. I hope that maybe through these discussions we can start to think a little bit more deeply and reflectively about our relationship with animals, about how we view them not just in the worst situations, but broader than that. Because one thing I do think it's important to emphasize is that my idea isn't just to create a world where gas chambers don't exist, if that means that animals are still being slaughtered. Referencing the terrible things that we do to animals reinforces just how far we've devalued them. But even within, let's say, systems of farming that are better, or ways of slaughter that maybe are not quite as violent and horrible as the ones that are currently most prevalent, we can sometimes fall into the trap of presuming that something better is something good enough. If we just got rid of factory farming, then it would be okay. If we just abolished cages for hens, or we just got rid of gas chambers for pigs, then it would be okay. And we're constantly trying to rationalize ourselves with ourselves, trying to create compromises that allow us to feel more settled in the way that we're living. You know, it's not our fault, it's not necessarily even that animals are being killed, it's just the way it currently is happening. And so these industries, if they changed that, it would be okay. And something that I often hear is the idea that we as consumers should place responsibility on ourselves. And I think in many situations that's understandable. Because There are so many problems around the world right now. I could spend multiple hours listing them off. Of course, we know what's happening in Gaza, we know what's happening in Ukraine, Sudan, Yemen, all over the world, terrible things happening to humans. We also know about the climate crisis and all these terrible things that are happening. And often with these issues, it feels like we don't have that much power to create change. And often we don't have that much power to create change. And so because of that almost powerlessness with these other issues, we can sometimes claim that it's not our responsibility, that it should be those in positions of authority who do everything to make it easy for us. And I do believe that should be how it works, but it's not how it works. And the thing about food, which is so important to us and this conversation, is that we hold the power. We hold the power because we eat 3 times a day. We buy food to consume every single day. It's not negotiable. We have to eat to survive, to live, to prosper. But within that, we have the ability to choose, the ability to create something different just by simply changing the way that we currently live. There's power in that. Food is empowering because it's a decision that we make. And because we have choice, it gives us the ability to make a choice that most closely aligns with the people we are and the world that we want. How often do we get to say that? Not very. This is why I believe that this conversation isn't just one that is disappointing and negative because of the troubling things that we do, but it also has an air of optimism and hope and empowerment. Because it's very rare that we can make a choice that is so profound, that is so impactful, but is something that we can choose to remove our participation in. I think that's incredibly empowering, incredibly rewarding. To think that just something as simple as going into a supermarket and buying something else can be powerful, can create change. To me, that only reaffirms the importance of this conversation, only elevates the importance of this conversation. Because what it says to us is that actually we don't necessarily even need the EU to bring in legislation, or I wish they could. Those pesky farmers with their tractors, right? I wish that they were to do so. But we can also rely on one another, community building. That's what veganism is. It's a movement of community building. And this isn't a community where we have to even be on the streets together, even though that's a great thing to do. This is a community of people all around the world who are tied together because of just making different choices every single day that add up in the long term to something profound happening. How wonderful is that? To know that just through the choices we make, we become interlinked with a global community of people also doing the same. I love that idea. The idea that we're not reliant on someone else, that we're not reliant on politicians and lobbyists and PR firms and consultancy firms. We're not even reliant on them. We're reliant on one another to raise each other up and to be critical thinkers. And the problem with food is because it's so normalized, so ingrained, so ubiquitous, we often fall into the trap of believing it not needing to be an issue that we have to think about. We often think that if it was a big enough issue, we'd be told about it, right? And the problem with that is it's often the most normalized and ingrained behaviors which have the least amount of scrutiny placed upon them, which makes sense. Surely something that the vast majority of people are doing can't be wrong. Surely something that's allowed under law can't be wrong. Surely something we can buy in a supermarket or a cafe can't be wrong. And we fall into the trap of soothing our conscience through this adoption of what others are doing, through this participation in something that we then fail to think about deeply. And that's why I said towards the beginning that I don't think I need to convince people of something they don't necessarily already believe. I think my role as a vegan advocate is hopefully just to maybe add an element of doubt into people's minds so they start to hopefully realize that the way that they think and the morals they have don't actually align with the food choices they currently make. And I think that is a powerful thought because it's not suggestive of an us versus them mentality. And the thing is, vegans get labelled with all sorts of terms. I mean, there's probably a fair few of us in here that are being called militant, and extreme, and judgmental, and dogmatic, and argumentative, and look, we sometimes are some of those things, right? I can hold up my hand and admit that I've fallen into those things before. But I also think that that isn't the mentality that we ought to have. Because I think that the conversations that we have with others, with ourselves, with people who don't necessarily agree with us, are conversations about bridge building. It's not about pointing out the flaws in others, it's about realizing what we share in common, which I strongly believe are the principles that actually hold up veganism to begin with. Now, something I like to do in schools, and sort of different places where I'm talking to large groups, is do a little thought experiment. And I like to pretend there's a blank canvas next to me. And if I was good at art, I probably would bring one, but I'm absolutely hideous at drawing. So you'll just have to imagine I'm very talented and there's a canvas next to me. And on this canvas, what I want to do is I want to draw an alternative to what we have now. And this alternative is one that I want to offer you, alongside the one that we already have. And I just want you to decide for yourselves if you prefer the one that I'm offering. And so the one that I'm offering, straight off the bat, nice and easy, no antibiotics. No antibiotics in our food system. Because right now, globally, the majority of antibiotics are given to farm animals. And yet, we're also being told that antibiotic-resistant bacteria is becoming an ever-increasing problem. And by the year 2050, it may kill as many people per year as cancer currently kills per year. So in 26 years' time, that's frightening. And yet, the majority of the antibiotics that we use as a species are not given to ourselves to protect ourselves from bacteria, but are given to animals and farms to keep them alive just long enough so that when we kill them, we can extract as much profit from them as possible. So the first thing, no antibiotics. Another great thing, no salmonella. No E. coli. Because even though we get E. coli from plants sometimes, the reason is because of the manure and the feces that comes from animals. You see, E. coli is a digestive disease, right? So we spray it on our vegetables and then we can get ill. But now I can offer you something that doesn't have E. coli, that doesn't come with salmonella, and even better still, we can remove the biggest drivers in the emergence of bird flu and swine flu viruses. Because the biggest driver in the emergence of these viruses just so happen to be the systems of farming which confine tens of billions of these animals together in confined small spaces where viruses can mutate and spread, and sometimes terribly can also cross over. And actually, the issue of bird flu is becoming more and more prevalent. I mean, right now it's terrifying. The issue of bird flu is being found in cattle for the first time ever in the US. So we have this underlying problem where a type of infectious disease, a virus, is being spread rampantly through our systems of animal farming and is mutating and could, theoretically, mutate into a virus that could cause the next pandemic. We've had bird flu pandemics before. The problem is, the way that we're going, we will have one again. But I can offer you a food system that not only doesn't have antibiotics, not only does it come with the E. coli and salmonella risk that we currently have from certain animal products, but also removes the biggest driver in the emergence of these types of viruses. Pretty good stuff, right? But it doesn't just end there. Because this food system has also been shown by the United Nations and by the world's leading environmental and academic institutions to be the most sustainable one that we can choose. So not only is it ticking all those boxes, but it just so happens to be the best diet that we have for the planet, which is pretty neat. Because not only is it good because it removes animals that produce methane, or because it removes animals that require huge amounts of land, but in doing so removes the biggest driver of deforestation, the biggest driver of habitat loss, and the biggest driver of species extinction, which is the farming of animals. Because the biggest user of land is the farming of animals. So that's pretty exciting. And if we remove the farming of animals, we can rewild these areas of land that we no longer need. Rewilding increases biodiversity, but also rewilding creates an opportunity for us to harness the power of photosynthesis, because more trees, more woods, more plants means more photosynthesis. More photosynthesis means more carbon being sequestered. So all of a sudden we're starting to see how this one food system is adding up to be pretty beneficial to us. And not only that, but this food system allows us to produce more food at a lower cost, meaning we can make food more affordable and accessible. In the EU, about 80% of the subsidies that are given to farmers in the agriculture industry are given to farmers involved in the production of animal products. That means that the money that is given to the EU through taxpayers' funds and is then distributed to the farming industry through subsidy schemes is overwhelmingly going to a system of farming that is destructive, unethical, and harmful. But we can change that. We can reclaim public money, which is meant to be spent for public good, and use that money to create healthier, more affordable, more accessible plant foods, and use that money to create food innovation and to rewild these landscapes. How exciting! To change something so utterly corrupt, such as our subsidy policies, and use that money that we as taxpayers give to do something that we as taxpayers benefit from. My goodness, now it's really starting to get exciting, isn't it? Because the consumption of plants, whole plant foods, has been shown to reduce the risk of certain chronic diseases as well, so we can even live healthier lives as well. And if all of that wasn't enough, it also means removing the biggest driver and cause of animal suffering, harm, and death that we humans partake in on this planet. And I would strongly argue that that, in and of itself, is enough for us to stop doing what we're doing. But the fact that this food system can add all of these other things as well, at what point do you just call it a no-brainer? I think probably at the antibiotics point, right? But everything past that, and the animals themselves are deserving enough for us to realize that what we have currently must come to an end. For the sake of ourselves, our planet, and importantly for the sake of them, sentient, conscious, feeling individuals who are not objects, who we are not entitled to the bodies of, whose lives are valuable to them as our lives are valuable to us, and who deserve just the most basic empathy from us, because we as humans have power, and with great power comes great responsibility. All I ask is that it is now time for us to use that power responsibly. Okay, thank you so much for listening. You are very, very kind. Thank you. That's awfully kind of you. Let's do some questions then. Does anyone have an opening question? And again, I'm happy to take easy questions, but if anyone has any difficult questions as well, I will do my best. Right, at the back, yes.
I think everyone was listening to me, but it's okay. About 2019 was when I actually changed because I read a magazine from National Geographic at the time about wildlife tourism. So it had nothing to do with veganism at the time, but then I started hearing about. And recently I saw one of your, I think it was the latest videos that you released about the struggles of veganism and how you find that it's the most difficult thing about veganism is actually dealing with others. It's not actually finding vegan options or whatever. And one of the things that I struggle with is to make, because I'm vegan since 2019, at the time I had several conversations and everything, but everything closed up because now I'm vegan and everyone knows.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I struggle is like continuing to have these conversations with close friends and family and everything, because it feels like everyone already knows that I'm vegan, so it's Anna, she's going to the restaurant with a vegan option and she's fine, and let's not discuss this anymore. So what advice would you give for a person who is stuck in this position?
Oh gosh, this is in many ways for vegans the $1 million question, isn't it? There is no easy answer. That's the problem. It's not. It's so nuanced, so complex, so dependent on our friendships, who these people are, what their mindsets are, how we are. It's really hard. And yeah, there is this perception, I think, that people have, if they're not vegan. They think of vegans and they think, gosh, being vegan must be so hard. I mean, you can't eat steak anymore, and you can't just go into any, you have to kind of look at what line. It must be really tricky. You must feel hard. And it's like, that's that's fine, you know? The hardship is like, and I tried to emphasize it a number of times in the talk, the hardship is coming to terms with some of these things, recognizing the problem, but then existing, right? And existing in a world of nice, kind, good people who just are engaged in this very awful thing, but not because they're awful people. Your family members, your friends, just people all around you. There is this butcher shop near where I live in London, and I just hate walking past this butcher shop because they are very happy to put on display animals, so pigs' heads. So sometimes I'll walk past and I'll just be a pig's head, or animals who've been plucked, but their heads are still there. They're just hanging, literally hanging by their necks, just in the shop window. And you know, and there's always people walking around, drinking flat whites, walking their dogs. It's a very pleasant, nice area, lovely streets. And then it's like, there's a shop there with a decapitated body, with the heads there, and their eyes. And I'm walking past, and you just think, is this real? And I don't know about you, but for me as a vegan, sometimes we end up in our sort of bubbles, don't we? Our echo chambers sometimes. And we go to vegan restaurants, we hang out with vegan people, and what happens then is we can, when you sort of fall into the trap of thinking, oh, vegan, right? Everything's vegan. And then you go outside and you see something, like a burger or a photograph of something, and my brain goes, there's a vegan burger, there's a vegan hot dog, there's a vegan this. And then my brain catches up and it goes, no, that's not what this is. And then you go, oh, yeah, that's right. And so sometimes I find myself walking past this butcher shop and I'm just going, part of me just want to go, what's going on here? There's like people going in with their dogs. I'm just like, part of me wants to go in there and ask for a dog, you know? Ask them to put it's really hard to put into words sometimes, that feeling, because it's not misanthropy. It's not a hatred of people. It's not a hatred of the people who engage in this. I actually kind of like humans. Some humans. There are some of us I don't like so much, but I think I do have a lot of time for us. So it's not that I'm thinking, oh God, I hate people are awful, blah, blah. That's not what I'm thinking. I'm just feeling confused, disappointed, sad. And so then what you have to do is you have to keep going, keep walking, to go meet a friend. And that friend is also part of the problem. So you go out for dinner with a friend and they may be very nice, you know, they don't cause you problems, you can order your vegan meal and they order what they're eating. And then you have this thought like, how am I supposed to be? Because there's this feeling that we have, right, where if we're quiet, that's a form of complicity, right? But then it's like, but if I say something, is that going to help? Is that going to cause an argument? Is that going to cause a problem? Are they going to hate me? Are they going to hate vegans because of me? So now we have to navigate this very complex interpersonal web where we have to be great friends, great vegans, true to our morals. We have to laugh at jokes, we have to smile when it's appropriate, but we also have to see people eating the body of an animal who was maybe put in a gas chamber or had their throat cut. And we're supposed to like laugh at the joke and pretend the world's fine and get on with it, and then go to work the next day and be surrounded by people who maybe are teasing us, maybe are mocking us, or are ambivalent, and you know. And it's not that, and I think that when non-vegans hear maybe me saying things like this, they think that I have this sense of expectation that people have to agree with me. You know, oh, you just want everyone to subscribe to the way you're thinking. That's tyrannical. That's a form of thought policing, right? To think that you have to do what I do. And I understand that. But I also think it's important for us to recognize that this isn't about thought policing or making people subscribe to the things that we think. It's just about trying to encourage people to actually think about what they're doing. To actually have an honest conversation, a critical reflection. And I think the thing that we as vegans often find hardest and most frustrating is not that people don't necessarily disagree with us right now, or don't necessarily agree with us right now, is that they won't even try to understand us. They won't even try to have a sincere and honest conversation. Because as soon as that happens, it it becomes challenging and argumentative, and people want to mock us. And it's the hardest with friends and family, because the relationships there are the most important. They are the ones that have most at stake, and they're the ones that have the most amount of baggage. And not necessarily negative, it's just there's more emotion there, there's history, there's more there. And there's more reason for it to carry a heavier weight. So, yeah, it's just this very complex thing. This is a really roundabout way of me trying to tell you that I don't have a very good answer. But in my head, if I take 15 minutes to tell you that, it'll feel like a better answer. But I think you just have to play it by ear. It's okay to be with friends, to be with family, and not say something. It's okay to go home for Christmas and not say something. No, that's fine. We have to look after ourselves, our mental health, and we have to respect that sometimes situations are not necessarily suitable situations for us to bring this up. So don't just try and create a bit of an emotional space between what's happening, the people who are doing it, how you feel. Engage in conversations when it's appropriate, when it's organic. That's a bit airy, isn't it? What are those situations? It's hard to know. But I think you should never feel you are never the problem when you don't say something. And when you do say something, we have a real responsibility to communicate to those people in a good way. So when we do open our mouths and we do ask, or we do have a question, or we do have a conversation with someone, we have to be responsible for the way that we act and make sure that we're not perpetuating a stereotype or a norm within that dynamic. So there is an element of responsibility on us to make sure that we are being understanding, empathetic, listening, as well as being sort of forthright in our views, in our convictions. But I also think it's important to recognise that we're not the problem, and that the frustrating thing is they're not even necessarily the problem, because they are just a symptom of the problem, which is this industry and its ungodly power and financial resources that have allowed them to create a situation where kind, good, nice people who are friends, our family, are living in a world where this is so normalised and so ubiquitous that it's not even a conversation they need to have, nor do they want to have. And I think that separation is hard, but I guess that's important. Yeah, it's tricky though. You can only do your best. And we will never be perfect, and we'll never get through to everyone. We can only do our best, and we shouldn't punish ourselves or be self-critical, or, we shouldn't beat ourselves up because of the failings of a society that's not our fault, and nor even the fault of those who are trying to get this message through to. Oh.
Hi, so can you hear me? So first off, thank you so much for speaking to us today. Kind of going off of that question from my master's dissertation at the University of Porto, I learned about the plight of non-human animals, and I connected it to an international relations theory. And in my studying, I came across a researcher who said kind of an issue that our friend here is struggling with, which is having an impact with people that you're sitting around at the table. But they said that they found that just their presence and just the option to not choose to eat meat speaks so much volume, and that it's not always needed to speak about it. And I felt that myself. I've gone on vacations with my boyfriend and his friends, and at first I was the only vegan. And then by the next vacation, there was a girl who stopped eating land animals and later fish. And now by this vacation, it feels like half of us are vegan, and I wouldn't make any comments unless they were brought to me. And so, yeah, I guess I have a question as well, but I just wanted to bring that up, that I found that really enlightening, how just the choices we make, even if we think that we're not saying something vocally, that the other people are thinking about their choices. So there's that. But also going along with the whole idea of the mockery that we unfortunately have to face. How much of that mockery do you think is really people feeling their guilty conscience? Because I feel like when I have conversations with people, the people that I know, that they're having difficulties with that cognitive dissonance, right? And they're, they're struggling, as many of us have before we make the decision to quit eating animals. So how much I don't know, percentage, or how much of that group of people making fun do you think are actually, low-hanging fruit, as they say? They're people who we could turn into vegans, and how to approach those people who seem to be against us, but in fact, I think if they were so against us, they'd be a bit more dismissive and not making fun. I think if they really thought that we had an issue or there was something wrong with us, they would make fun of us, right? I think the fact that they point us out and they try to make a show of us, I think it means something is gnawing at them inside.
Great question. Yes, I think the first thing you said is really important, that actually leading by example and just being a vegan is often a really good thing to do. Just be a good role model for veganism by being a normal person. And who is vegan, and then you normalise the idea of veganism to those people around you. It's a great anecdote, thank you for sharing that. The second thing, yeah, I think there is an element of that. I think sort of mockery and teasing and such is often like, when you get to a point where someone is like mocking you or something, one of the things you can probably be fairly confident of is that they don't necessarily have a very good response. Because if they did, they'd give it, right? I mean, if you ask someone a question and their response is to mock you, that's an answer. It's just not a good answer. So there is an element of that, I think. And I think also, there's an element of mockery reclaims a sense of power. I think when mocking someone, the idea of mocking someone is to make them feel small, make you feel big. And so I think that when people are around people, vegans or anyone who's representing anything that can create a sense of mockery from others, I think that often that mockery is a sense of trying to reclaim power. People maybe feel like, maybe they feel intellectually like they're being challenged and they can't meet the task that's being required of them. Maybe emotionally they know they're being challenged and they can't meet the task that's being asked of them. And so maybe they start to feel small. They start to doubt themselves. Maybe they feel insecure. Maybe they feel unintelligent, ignorant. And these are all feelings that can make us feel small. And so an easy way of trying to make ourselves feel big is to make someone else feel small. So you might tease them or mock them or whatever it is. So I think it's just often a very basic, primitive power dynamic situation. And I think that definitely is a part of it. I also think sometimes mockery comes from a place of, I suppose, tying into that, like a vulnerability. I think it can be quite a powerful thing when someone does say something to you, because in a way, your reaction to that can also create a sense of power and conviction around how you live. My stepdad, for example, a nice guy mostly, apart from he sometimes says, "We've got cardboard boxes waiting for you when you come home." It's so funny, isn't it? Someone give him a job as a comedian. I'm teasing. Okay. That made me feel small. I think that the reason behind that is a kind of a sense of, he knows that when I'm there, my presence will make me feel a bit uncomfortable. So I don't think it's always a bad thing. I think, and also it depends on a cultural thing. It depends on who's doing it. I think a very British cultural thing is to kind of be sarcastic and tease. And so it really depends on the situation. You know when something's meant to be hurtful or when something's meant to be playful. You can probably kind of gauge that. And I think sometimes that playful provocation can be kind of a fun way into it, because you can sort of playfully get back to people. But then when people are being hurtful and spiteful and are using mockery in a very vindictive way, I think that can also be revealing. So basically, we as vegans, we need to have thick skin, but not so thick that non-vegans want to turn us into leather, of course. That would be a problem as well. But we need to have thick skin because we have to deal with a lot of these things, and it's about not viewing that as being a reflection on us. When someone says something that's hurtful, it's often a reflection on them. When someone says something that's horrible or mocking, it's a reflection on them and who they are and how they feel. That's a very powerful thing to think. If someone says something to you to undermine you, that's a reflection on them. So it's hard to get that kind of emotional space. I mean, I fail to do that regularly when people do these things. But if you can kind of get that sense of space And you can kind of view this for what it is, which is someone who's trying to make themselves feel better and is taking out on you as a form or a tool to make themselves feel okay, or to just try to ignore or repress what you're making them feel. It kind of gives you a little bit more conviction, a little bit more power in that conversation to know this isn't about me. And I think that can be helpful. So it's not like framing and such, but it's a very, very helpful thing at times, and a very important point. Yeah, great question. No, you did have your hand up. Did you? Yeah.
So my question is kind of following on from Anna's and Lucy here. One thing I really admire about you as an advocate and an activist is how you were able to keep it cool when triggered, let's say. I think as vegans that's something we experience a lot. And most of us vegans are very passionate and sensitive, so one thing I've really struggled with over the years is keeping an emotional distance when having those discussions with non-vegans. I tend to get quite upset and then I forget the good arguments that I've studied before. How do you keep that emotional distance when you're talking about these upsetting topics?
Yeah.
Is that something that is just with practice that you become more articulate over the years, or are there any tips, practical tips you can give us? That's something I want to improve on, and I'm sure that was being here as well.
Yeah, another great point is that. Look, I think practice is fundamental to anything, isn't it? You know, the more we do something, the easier it becomes, the more confident we become. And practice, I suppose, gives us that sense to know that we can. Once we've done something, we can do it. And so it gives us the sense of courage and knowledge about what we can achieve. So practice is paramount. But practice can emerge in different ways. Practice obviously is the act of talking to a non-vegan or talking to a friend or family member. We can also do it within friendship groups. We can do workshopping. There are different ways of doing things. Politicians or journalists will do mock interviews and mock debates with members of their own team. So you get used to answering questions. You get used to verbalizing thoughts and opinions. You can have someone play different roles. So you get used to different environments. So I think practice, if you're in an activist group or your friend or spouse or partner or whoever is a vegan, you can practice it in that sense. You might be thinking, right, we've got to go home to my mother's for Christmas dinner. Shall we have a little practice Christmas dinner? And kind of like, what will I say? What if they say this? What if they say that? Yeah. It's not the funnest way to spend an evening, I'll admit, but it might be helpful. Another thing to do is to not try and to create a false equivalence between sort of calmness and respect as being as kind of being a replacement for anger and frustration. I think one of the worst things that can happen, when we care about something deeply, is to lose that sense of care. So I think it's really important that we don't think that I can't be angry and respectful, or I can't be angry and be calm, because we should be angry. And the emotion that we feel that sometimes comes out in bad ways is a very, very valid emotion, incredibly valid. And I think anger and frustration and sadness and disappointment and all of these things is the most valid thing that you could feel. How could it not be? What else would be valid? Ambivalence? No. Ambivalence. Or, I don't know, you're not going to be happy, you're not going to be... These are the most valid things we can feel. So we shouldn't think we have to lose that passion, lose that anger. We just have to use it in a different way. So it's about that kind of emotional space. And the thing that I try to do is create a separation from the person and the problem. When someone says something to me, I try and not view that as being someone saying something to me because of something just then. But they are a product of their environment, their culture, the laws that exist around them, what is perpetuated to them, and what they are saying is information that has been given to them by the wider world that they exist within. And so when someone sits down to me and they say, but soy farming is destroying the Amazon, right? And you eat tofu, so it's your problem. The first thing that happens inside of me is my blood boils. It raises so high that steam is practically coming out my ears. And it happens, it's just, one of those things that you just, gosh, That annoys me so much. So that happens, and then as that's happening, just, okay. And then I think, it's not their fault, I know why they feel this way, I understand why they feel this way, there is logic there, soy farming is one of the biggest problems in South America. Vegan products are often made from soy, so there's logic in that conclusion, and you just try to rationalize it all up. And all of a sudden, it's not their fault they feel this way. They're a product of misinformation and of just false conclusions, but based on evidence where that false conclusion is understandable. Okay. So that helps me just to kind of get a little bit of separation. Now, the other thing is it doesn't always work. Sometimes you are going to have a moment where you get really annoyed. I had a couple of years ago now, 3 or so years ago now, when I was in the US, I think every story like this always starts with when I was in the it's never, you know, when I was in Amsterdam, you know, it's like, when I was having, you know, a spritz in Porto, no, never that. When I was in the US, I went to this place called Huntington Beach. Don't go. And when I was there, I was trying to get some content. There was a guy there with a sign. His sign was, you know, Jesus saves, repent now, the end is nigh. And for some reason, this self-destructive thought in my head, debate him. And I know rationally that is a terrible idea, right? You know, there is just no way that that's going to end well. And it didn't, right? So we start the conversation, and very quickly it dawns on me, this is bad. And he pulls out some very classics that are not vegan related, but just about all sorts of things. And then he tries to tell me that the reason that God created snakes was so they could be turned into handbags. I mean, I don't know the Bible that well. I'm not an avid reader, but I do know that Adam and Eve, when they were in the Garden of Eden, the snake in the apple tree, she did turn into a handbag, right? I don't think so. I don't think they had the tools or technology to do that. This is going to be great. I don't remember that happening. So I was fairly confident he was wrong. But then, as the conversation got more and more, he said, "You are the devil." He said, "You are the devil, and you have come to challenge me." Which I was kind of flattered by it. I thought, "What the heck, the devil's chosen me." You know? So there was an element of that. Okay. But that's not what I didn't say thank you. I said, "You are an idiot." And I think as I walked off, I turned around, I stuck two fingers up at him and said, "You are an effing idiot," and walked off. And I felt terrible shame about that. I should have just laughed it off. I should have just said, "Look, I'm wasting my time. Let's not do this. You know, this is pointless. We're not going to see eye to eye. This was a mistake. Sorry for wasting time." You know, that's what I should have said. But I got reactive, and I actually felt a lot of shame. I felt terror. I said, "Sorry, I'm not him." But I said sorry to people I was with. I was like, I should have done that. I don't feel good about that. But my point is, it happens, and there will always be people who push your buttons. And I should have known that you push my buttons. But you know, and I think it's just a learning experience. And now I know two things. Firstly, don't engage with people who have those signs. And secondly, in a situation, if someone's really getting under your skin, just say, "This isn't working. I'm going to leave now. Thanks for your time." Just be mature and adult, and that's what I should have done. And that was the thing, and I've not reacted like that since. But then I've not had a situation like that since, but I've not reacted like that. So I think it's just about learning and practice. Practice, and I have you can tell from my ramblings that my brain kind of operates in a way where it's constantly talking to me. And so I'm always thinking about like different arguments and how to respond and what would I say. And you know, Instagram and social media nowadays, it never fails to give me something that blows my mind that I have to just go and sit and think about for 5 minutes. For example, the other day I saw some podcasting, always podcasters, right? There's like an epidemic of like a certain type of person in America with these podcasts, and just as soon as you see them, you know exactly who they are. Anyway, he told the audience that plants are used to subjugate populations, and pushes for plant-based food now follow in the footsteps of sort of subjugators and dictators in the past who used plants to weaken populations they could easily control. So I take 5 minutes about and just really calm down. But then it gets me thinking, well, what would I say in that situation? How would I respond? So now if it did happen, I'd feel at least prepared for it in a way. So preparation, practice, and kindness to yourself. Be kind to yourself. We're not perfect. We will make mistakes. Not every conversation is going to go well. We don't have a responsibility to turn someone vegan on the spot. It's never going to happen well. It doesn't happen often. But what I think we should do is just simplify that process down and say, when we have a conversation with someone, our role isn't to make them go vegan straight away. We would love it if it happened. It probably won't happen. But our job and our role in that situation is to implant just an idea or a seed of doubt that they didn't think about before. In other words, to leave someone with a more favourable view of veganism than when they started. That's the role that we have, because turning people vegan on the spot or to get them to this huge paradigm shift instantly is going to be so hard. And they have to be very, very close to making that change anyway, I think, for you to do that push right at the end. So be kind to yourself, make sure your expectations are achievable so that you don't constantly feel like you're failing. And there was another thing which I was going to say, which was going to sound really good, I promise. For me personally, the situation I'm in is very unique in the sense that I'm very, very privileged, and I'm in a very, very, in a really very particular situation where my job is to talk about veganism, and that's what I do. And part of that is content, so uploading debates and such. And so when I have debates with people, it's not only that I think that being respectful and kind, as much as I can be without being patronising or such. It's not only that I think that that's the best thing to do, but I also think that that's my responsibility that the people who follow me are owed. So, for example, what I mean by this is, when I uploaded a piece of content, I want that content to be good, and I want it to be shareable, and I want it to be impactful. And if it was me going up to people on the street and saying, "You are scum, I hate you," that's A, not going to turn anyone vegan, it's B, just terrible content, and C, you guys are not going to like me and not going to want to share it, and that's good. Don't, please. So I also have a responsibility, not only as someone who talks about this issue with people, but as someone who has people who support what I do and follow me. I have an obligation to those of you who support me. And if I cannot fulfill the most basic criteria, which is hopefully have sort of good, effective, positive conversations with people where possible, then I don't deserve your support, and I don't deserve to be speaking to the animals, because I have a responsibility to not only try and act in a way that's best for them, but also to show my gratitude and appreciation to all of you who have followed me for however long by maintaining the expectation you have of me, which is hopefully, fingers crossed if I can achieve it, being a good role model, a good communicator for this issue. Fingers crossed I try my best. That's the bare minimum I should do. And if I fail to do that, then I'm letting you down, but I'm letting them down. So I place responsibility on my shoulders, not in a toxic, beat myself up way, but just as this is my responsibility, and I have to accept that. And if I can't, then I have to change what I'm doing. So that may sound a little bit punishing, but I don't mean it to be that way. I just mean that when I sit down to have a conversation with someone, not only am I acting in a way which I believe is best, and I hope is best, but I'm also doing so in a way which I think produces the best content, which is hopefully best for you guys, and hopefully best for the people who watch it. Yeah, anyway, long-winded way of saying whatever I tried to say there. Thank you. So, yes, one more question?
So first of all, I want to say that I'm pretty sure all my friends and my mom that are vegetarian now, not vegan. It's because of you, because you got me better arguments. Because I was really emotional. That was my thing. Like I got crying and stuff about this animal rights stuff, and I'm vegan for 8 years now. So it's a lot of work and a lot of seeing your videos. So thank you a lot. But the last argument that I got in was because a friend of mine that is a meat eater, he was telling me these thing that I never thought about. So he told me if he was a vegan like me, he would not go to Burger King or McDonald's to eat the vegan options because they are like a large meat industry, so I'm giving money to the meat industry. But where does it stop? Like I go to the supermarket, so I don't know. What's your opinion on this?
It's a fantastic question. Okay, controversial. The first thing I want to do is just retread a point I made earlier, which is about soy farming. I never actually responded to why I think that's a good argument. I just thought maybe there's people in the audience who are not vegan who may want to know why. Basically, it's because 96% of the soy produced in South America is used as animal feed. So just to highlight, soy farming in South America is causing problems, but it's because of the feed that's produced to feed to animals. So just wanted to clarify that in case anyone was left thinking, yeah, but why this would not boil over such a great question. Now, the harder question. The first thing to recognise is that we live in an entirely imperfect world. Okay? Situations like this are not so black and white. In a perfect world, we would be able to just support ethical vegan businesses, and we'd pat ourselves on the back, and that would be great. That's not the world we live in. We live in a world where one of the biggest barriers that veganism faces is accessibility, affordability, and convenience. Right? Those are three of the biggest problems we face. And the problem is if we only support vegan businesses, then that doesn't necessarily improve accessibility, affordability, availability. Now, that's not to say that we all have to go to McDonald's or Burger King and buy the vegan burgers. If you don't want to, there's so many reasons why that's understandable, okay? No problem at all. But I think about myself when I was younger, and I think of my friendship group. And what we would always do is we'd go into the city centre, and we'd buy McDonald's. That was like the thing that we did. Or we'd go for a night out, the night out would end at McDonald's. Now, I'm thinking about if I'd gone vegan at that time, say I'm 18 years old, I've gone vegan, none of my friends are vegan. And so they want to do the same thing. They want to go to McDonald's, they want to go for a night out, end up in McDonald's at the end. And I now have a couple of choices. The first thing is I don't partake in that. I go to McDonald's, I don't buy anything, or I buy the chips if the chips are vegan where I am. Or I become a problem and make my friends feel bad. And maybe when I'm 18 and I've just gone vegan, I'm instantly perpetuating a negative stereotype, either way. Either I'm being a problem, or I'm living in a way that is removing our ability as a friendship group to do the things that we do as friends. In essence, I'm creating a barrier between what we do and myself. And I think about that, and I think about how lonely I would have felt if all my friends were eating Big Macs and chicken sandwiches, terrible things to eat, and I, through moral conviction, didn't partake in that, and either sat there and watched them, didn't go in with them, or whatever. I'm creating this very negative impression of veganism, and it'd be hard for me to stick at that. My friends might tease me, they might not understand, and I think about a lot of young people who are making changes, or older people who are making changes, and they might be the only ones who are doing it. Now, if we only have vegan places to go to, you're the only vegan in your group of friends. Are your friends going to go to the vegan place to eat vegan food? Probably not. They'll probably tell you to eat before you arrive. Or I think that it creates a problem where we make veganism alienating for vegans, for those vegans. It's great when we have bubbles and we have groups of friends and we can make those decisions to go to vegan businesses, and we should do that, and we should support them. That's great. But we have a privilege to have vegan friends, or at least enough non-vegan friends who are happy for us to do that and happy to eat vegan food when they're with us. Not everyone has that privilege or that luxury. A lot of people don't. I meet many people who are the only vegan. And I think how alienating it would be for them if they couldn't go out to those restaurants or to those places or whatever. So I think it is important these places have vegan options, because the question is, would we prefer them to have options or not have options? Of course we prefer them to have options. Now, does that mean that McDonald's has a vegan option because they care? No, of course not. McDonald's is scum. They don't care. They do things for money. They do things for money. Okay, fine. Now, what I think to myself is this. What do I want to achieve? I want to achieve a vegan world as fast as possible. I want to achieve a world where vegan products are the norm and where people are able to eat them everywhere they go, and hopefully are the only products that are existing because people want that to be the way that it is. How am I going to get there fastest? How am I going to get there the most quickly? And In an ideal world, it would be super simple. We would make McDonald's about business, and the rise of veganism would be unstoppable, and it would be exponential, and it would be exponential because we just support vegan businesses and everybody wins. That's not the world we live in. And so we have to make those grey decisions, which are, do I want to have these vegan options in these places, knowing that the reason they exist isn't virtuous or morally driven, but it's just profiteering, it's just financially motivated, or do I not? And I would much rather they did have them. Because I think the alternative makes veganism harder, less normal, more fringe, less accessible, and less easily adopted by people who maybe aren't part of activist groups, or who don't have the friendship groups that I and maybe many of you do have. And so I think that we shouldn't judge people for buying those products. I've bought them. I probably will buy them again. I don't tend to, but I would never say that I wouldn't buy them. And I think the reason for that is because my goal is to achieve this world as fast as possible. And that might mean making decisions or having things that exist that I don't necessarily want in an ideal situation, but I have to accept as the way things currently are. I just don't know what the alternative is. Because another issue we have to think about, and there's been a few vegan places that are no longer vegan. There's a couple in London, this place, Clean Kitchen, started selling burgers. A place in Berlin called Vegan started selling beef burgers. So in my head, I could have been supporting vegan businesses, but they weren't. They were owned by non-vegans, they just sold vegan food. So what was the moral distinction there? If I went to McDonald's and bought a vegan burger, or went to Clean Kitchen and bought a vegan burger, I'm still supporting non-vegan businesses. It's just one's only serving vegan food, and none doesn't. So now they serve beef burgers anyway. So even when I go into a vegan place, unless I know the owner and the structure and everything about it, I don't even know if I'm supporting a vegan business or a business that is vegan. So it just becomes very tricky. So I just don't know where we can draw those lines. And you're right, we go to a supermarket, is supporting bingo dolce? Is supporting that ethically different? And if it is, why? They have their own farms that produce animals. So if I'm buying their food, is that supporting that? It's just so tricky, it's a real minefield. And I think that when we start bringing barriers into this and saying, it's not vegan to go to this place, then we have to go, well, why is it vegan to go to that place? And what's the repercussion of what we're saying if we say that vegans can't eat here or vegans shouldn't do that? Because then the question becomes, well, what about making it more accessible, making it more normal? How do we get more and more people doing something if we're putting all these barriers to it? Not only do you have to be vegan, but now you have to be a vegan that only eats here and here and here and here. And if you eat there, you're not, it's just, one thing at a time. I would love for it to be a point where we can bankrupt McDonald's, where the CEOs and the people who are rich off McDonald's, I would love it if they didn't continue getting richer. I would love it if in the future those businesses didn't exist. But if I had a choice now between those businesses existing as vegan businesses or us not having a vegan world, it's a no-brainer to me. Because my motivation isn't to financially punish the CEO of McDonald's. My mission is to get a world where animals are not being farmed, exploited, and slaughtered. And if that means working with McDonald's for the time being, then I'll accept that as being the price to pay to get to that goal. Not one that I'm happy with, and not one that I think we should relish in, and we should never kid ourselves about what they're doing. But what's the alternative? Support a vegan business that might not even be owned by vegans. And I don't think that that's going to get to where we want to be. Anyway, that was a little bit, again, let me just make something very clear. If you don't want to eat those places, power to you, okay? But I don't think there's an obligation either way, is what I'm saying. I think that we should be understanding of both points of view. I'm such offences, right? But that's honestly how I feel. Thank you, great question. All right. I am so sorry. I don't mean to be rude, but I do want to mention that I've got time to sign people's books, because that's a lovely thing that you have done. So there is, however, just a couple of minutes at the end, my goodness, my brain sometimes. Just a few minutes at the end, one of the organisers has something to say about an event coming up. It's in Portuguese, so I won't understand, but from what I heard, it sounds great. So, thank you so very much. I really appreciate you being here.